Tonight, we walk beneath vaulted ceilings where whispers outlived the fire. In the stillness of hidden libraries, shadows stretch across shelves, once heavy with secrets now erased. What we search for is not myth nor miracle, but the fear of a savior who may have come from the stars. We begin in the quiet hours, when halls are empty and the sky presses close. In this space, stories speak. Not loudly, not with fanfare. With paper, with ink, with patient dust. For centuries, whispers have moved through these rooms, that the church guarded a possibility as vast as the night itself, that salvation might arrive from the stars. This is not a tale of scandal. It is a tale of gravity. Faith has weight. Power has habits. When a new light enters, old shapes shift. Think of sailors before maps, staring at constellations and naming their courage. Think of monks by candlelight, copying lines no one was ready to read. Now think of a message that does not fit the old shelves, a visitor whose presence breaks the frame. Would you shelve it? Would you study it? Would you hide it until the world could bear it? Tonight, we travel softly. We will look at star legends that glowed long before telescopes. We will listen for the edges where theology meets sky, where symbols meet signals. We will not rush. We will not shout. We will follow the thread, one room at a time, one page at a time, as if walking a labyrinth you can only trace by feel. If an otherworldly savior stood at the door, would the door open? Or would the hinges complain, and the keys turn slower than the heart? Breathe. This is a sleep story. Let the mystery wash over you like moonlight on stone. We are not here to prove. We are here to notice. We are here to rest with a question large enough to hold us. What changes truly if grace is bigger than earth? The night begins in silence. Thick stone walls hold the sound of centuries, as though the very air has been trained not to echo. You step softly, though your shoes are muted by the cool marble beneath. Above you, a ceiling arches like the inside of a ribcage, painted with faded frescoes that once told stories of angels, saints, and visions. Now those colors blur into shadow, the figures unblinking in the dim light. A corridor stretches long and narrow, lined with doors. Some are locked, others sealed, and still others pretend to be ordinary. Yet every one of them whispers with memory. The smell here is sharp with old wood polish and faint candle smoke, the same scent that clung to robes centuries ago. You walk slowly, aware of the weight of history pressing in from all sides. At the far end of the passage, a lamp burns low, casting a golden pool of warmth on the floor. You pause and listen. The silence is not empty, it hums. The way a seashell hums with ocean, the way a radio hums before tuning. The corridor itself seems to breathe. You remember the stories told in hushed tones, that somewhere in these walls lies a document not meant for the eyes of the restless world. A page so unsettling that it was hidden under seal, not destroyed. For destruction invites rumor. Silence invites forgetfulness. But tonight, you are here, moving with steady breath, drawn deeper by something more than curiosity. The corridor feels alive, each door like a guardian, each lock like a test. It is not menace you sense, but protection. As though the paper within does not fear you but fears the harm of misunderstanding. A single window breaks the wall. Outside, the moon drifts above the city of Rome. Its silver glow paints the rooftops in stillness. The city sleeps, but the corridor keeps watch. For centuries it has seen scholars pass with trembling hands, priests with furrowed brows, guards with heavy keys. And always the same question has hovered like incense. What truth is too great to tell? Your steps bring you closer to a narrow door marked only with a red wax seal. The wax is cracked but not broken, a faded emblem stamped into its surface. The symbol is familiar: crossed keys, the mark of authority. Yet there is something else in the design. Around the keys, faint lines curve like rays of light, or perhaps, like orbits. You lean closer. The wax has dulled with time, but its edges catch the glow of the lamp. Beneath the seal, the wood is smooth, as if handled too often by hesitant hands. This is the door you came to find. The one whispered about in corridors, in lectures, in fragments of letters tucked into other letters. The one that does not appear on any public record. Behind this door lies not only a page but an echo. An echo that has survived for centuries, though never spoken aloud. It is said that one night, long ago, a record was placed here. Too dangerous to burn, too fragile to share. A page that dared to imagine salvation arriving not from the soil of earth, but from the stars. The lamp flickers as though it, too, has heard the rumor. The corridor tightens. You rest your hand on the handle. The cold metal shivers under your palm. The door does not open. Not yet. Some doors are not meant to open quickly, so you stand still, breathing the heavy air, feeling the centuries around you. In the silence, the question rises in you again. If the Messiah came not in human flesh, but in other form, radiant and alien, what would we fear most, the loss of faith or the loss of control? The corridor waits, the door listens, and you, in this midnight hour, stand at the threshold of a secret that has always been too large to keep. The wax gleams faintly under your fingers. Time has cooled it, cracked it, dulled its once blood color, but still, it holds. The impression of the seal runs deep. 2 keys crossed beneath a crown, the symbol of authority, guardianship, and gates that open to heaven. Yet the seal is more than a mark. It is a warning. For centuries, seals like this one were placed on letters, decrees, scrolls, and secrets. They were more than wax. They were finality. A sealed page was a closed mouth, a vow of silence pressed into paper. To break it without permission was not merely disobedience, it was betrayal. You lean close and notice something hidden in the symbol. Around the crown are faint lines, curved like rings of light or paths of stars. They are almost invisible, carved lightly, as if the engraver wanted them overlooked. To most eyes, the seal is ordinary. To yours, in this quiet hour, it speaks. The seal carries weight because the seal protects power. A page without seal can be questioned, argued, even doubted. But a sealed page is untouchable. The reader cannot refute what they cannot see. And so, silence becomes stronger than speech. You wonder, what truth lies behind this particular seal? Some say it is only rumor. Others whisper that within, there is a record of visions, not of angels, not of saints, but of something the language of the time could not contain. A visitor who arrived in light, but not with wings. A presence that glowed with authority, yet bent to no earthly crown. The church feared error as much as heresy. To mistake a comet for a sign, or a dream for a doctrine, could fracture belief. And yet, the seal hints at something deeper. Why preserve, not destroy? Why hide, not erase? The seal becomes more than wax. It becomes a mirror of fear. Fear that humanity might not stand alone. Fear that the Savior could arrive unannounced. Not in Bethlehem, but in starlight. Not in prophecy, but in presence. Fear that this arrival would not kneel, would not confirm, would not obey. You rest your palm against the wood. Beneath it, the page waits. The seal is old, but still intact. You could break it. Yet even here, you hesitate. To break the seal is not only to open a door, it is to open a question that has slept for centuries. The corridor behind you is still. The lamp flickers. The seal remains. And in its silence, you hear the quiet tension of a truth preserved not to be read, but to be remembered. The drawer groans as it slides open. Inside, a bundle of parchment rests like a relic. Dust rises, drifting through the golden lamplight. You lift the top page carefully, its edges brittle, its ink faded to brown. The handwriting curves in Latin, steady, practiced, as though copied by a scribe trained to preserve, not interpret. At first glance, it seems ordinary, a record of a vision perhaps, or a testimony. The words follow the rhythm of prayer. But then you notice the margins. Small notes, written in a sharper hand, crowd the edges of the page. Unlike the formal script, these words lean quickly, almost in haste. They press into the spaces left empty, as though someone could not help but comment, respond, or confess. One note catches your eye. The ink is darker, as if written later, after the main text. It reads, "We feared the visitor, Because it did not kneel. You trace the letters slowly. The words shake you more than the page itself. For here lies the heart of the tension. The visitor arrived but did not bow. Not to throne, not to altar, not to authority. A presence that stood apart, radiant and firm, refusing to fit the mold. Other notes follow. Some soften the tone. Perhaps an angel, misunderstood. Another, more hesitant. If not of man, then of God. But the darker one remains, stark and final. It did not kneel. You imagine the scribe bent over this page by candlelight, torn between duty and wonder. What do you call a being that glows with power yet obeys no hierarchy? What do you call a presence that blesses yet resists control? In the margin, you see corrections scratched out, words replaced, fragments half erased. The fear is visible, not in the story itself, but in the hesitation of the pen. Someone wanted to speak plainly, but another hand, perhaps the same hand, later tried to soften it. You close your eyes and picture the scene the notes describe. A chamber filled with light, a figure descending in silence. Not winged, not crowned, simply radiant. A presence that filled the room with awe, yet, when addressed with prayers, remained unmoved. A being whose silence said, "I do not belong to you. I do not bend to your rules. I come not to serve your throne, but to reveal your smallness before the infinite." The margin notes are more than comments. They are confessions of fear. Fear that faith might be too small. Fear that the church's story might be only one chapter in a greater book. Fear that the true Messiah might not be human at all, but otherworldly. You hold the page, and the words blur in the lamplight. The corridor is quiet, the seal broken, the page open, the notes whispering into the silence. And you wonder, perhaps the notes were not meant to frighten. Perhaps they were meant to prepare. For one day, when the sky opens and light descends again, the question will return. What do we do when salvation does not kneel? The corridor is still, the lamplight soft, but inside you the air is shifting. The seal has been touched, the page unfolded, the margin notes read. Now the question rises larger than before. How much of faith is built on the need for keys and crowns? Keys are symbols of access. They unlock doors, they guard treasures, they claim authority over what lies within. In the church, keys are more than metal. They are the emblem of a power said to bind and loose, to decide what is forgiven and what is held. Crowns are no less heavy. They glitter not only on kings but in the invisible circle above a bishop's head, the shimmer of status, the weight of command. But what happens when a visitor comes who bends to neither key nor crown? You picture it. A being of light, entering softly, without weapon, without demand, without kneeling. Imagine the chamber where authority gathers, its tapestries glowing in torchlight, its air heavy with incense. Into that chamber comes a figure who carries no seal, no decree, and yet fills the space with undeniable presence. The men of keys glance at one another, their hands tightening around their symbols. The men of crowns lower their heads, unsure if to bow, unsure if bowing would even be seen. The visitor does not kneel, does not address the throne, does not ask for blessing. It's simply island radiant, whole, and in that stillness lies the greatest threat of all. Not violence, not defiance, but irrelevance. For if the source of salvation stands present, untouched by crown, unmoved by key, then what becomes of those who have built their lives around guarding gates? For centuries, authority has needed visible symbols. The faithful see the keys, and they trust in order. They see the crown, and they trust in lineage. But symbols are fragile. They only hold power when all agree to believe. A visitor from beyond earth, radiant with a light that is neither borrowed nor bestowed, breaks that agreement simply by existing. And so, perhaps, the church feared not blasphemy but collapse. Collapse of structure, collapse of hierarchy, collapse of the fragile trust that one human institution could stand between God and the people forever. A Savior who does not bow to crown or key reveals that the bridge already exists within the soul. That heaven requires no middleman. That salvation is not a throne to approach but a presence to receive. The page in your hands trembles slightly. Or perhaps it is your own hand that trembles. The margins whisper, We feared the visitor because it did not kneel. And now the fear is clearer. For if the visitor does not kneel, neither do those who follow it. Keys lose their teeth. Crowns lose their luster. Authority is unseated not by rebellion, but by revelation. The corridor sighs. The lamp flickers. And you, holding this fragile record, begin to see why silence was chosen. For silence can preserve crowns. Silence can protect keys. Silence delays the inevitable moment when light shines on the truth. That the true Savior, if not of this earth, has no need of thrones at all. The page lies open, the seal broken. Yet what unsettles you most are not the words in the center, but the smaller ones, crowding the margins. They reveal hesitation, uncertainty, and a desperate attempt to name what could not be named. Throughout history, the Church has been careful with names. Words like angel, messenger, spirit, and vision have been used to contain experiences that exceed language. To call something an angel is to place it within a familiar frame, even if the experience itself was unlike any angel ever described. But here, in these margins, the struggle is visible. A scribe has written, "Perhaps angel misunderstood." Another hand, different ink, notes, "Not of man, yet of God." You sense the tug of war, the need to explain, the need to soften, the need to fit the vision into a box that would not break faith. Whispered names have always protected fragile truths. To speak boldly is to risk fire, trial, exile. To whisper is to survive. And so, perhaps, those who glimpsed the visitor chose names that would not shatter the air. Angel, light, spirit, stranger, each name like a mask, each mask hiding something too radiant to describe. You imagine the chamber where the story was first told, a circle of listeners, a trembling voice recounting what had been seen, a light descending, a figure within it, not winged, not crowned, not human. Silence follows. Then someone whispers, "An angel, perhaps?" Heads nod, relieved. The story is saved, the faith is preserved, but the truth has already slipped sideways. Names matter because names build walls. To call the visitor angel is to place it under heaven's command. To call it stranger is to distance it. To call it Messiah is to hand it the keys to the whole story. And that was the name too dangerous to whisper. The page quivers under your hand. You see faint lines, scratched away, almost gone. You tilt it in the lamplight, and the shadow reveals the ghost of a word. Salvator. Savior. Erased, replaced, hidden beneath other safer words. The fear was not only of the visitor. The fear was of the word. To write Savior was to crown the stranger, to dethrone the familiar. And so the name was struck, the safer whispers written instead. But you, centuries later, can still see the scratch marks, the faint ghost of the word. You can still feel the tremor of the hand that dared to write it. For in that moment, the scribe named the unnameable. And though the ink was erased, the truth remains pressed into the fiber of the page. The corridor hums softly. The lamp flickers, then steadies. You close your eyes and breathe. Whispered names may protect for a time, but they also betray their own fear. One day, the name will be spoken clearly, not in margins, not in whispers, but in the open air. Until then, the page waits. And so does the name. You turn deeper into the drawer. Among the neat stacks of catalog pages, one bundle rests oddly. It carries no number, no title on its edge, no note of origin. A folio without a file, a child without a name. The librarians of centuries past kept careful order. Every page was logged, copied, sealed, yet this one sits apart, as though deliberately left in shadow. You lift it gently. The parchment is thicker, its edges rough. The ink bleeds darker, as if the hand that wrote it pressed too hard. The first line begins abruptly, mid-thought, as though copied from a source already fragmentary. There is no greeting, no address, only description. It came in silence, brighter than flame, yet no smoke, no ash, no heat. The words run uneven, less polished than the formal script of other pages. They feel urgent, hurried, as if the writer knew this account might not be welcomed. Sentences stumble. Descriptions circle, searching for language. Not cloud, not fire, not star, yet light. You flip the page. Again, margin notes cluster around the text. Some urge caution, metaphor perhaps. Others argue, do not soften. The tension is alive in the ink itself, as though two voices warred across the parchment, one trying to bury the experience, the other trying to preserve it. And here you notice something extraordinary. The folio is unfiled not because it was forgotten, it was unfiled because it could not be placed. Its contents refused category. Not miracle, not heresy, not parable. Too wild for doctrine, too clear for dismissal. It hovered in between, like the visitor itself present. Undeniable, but belonging nowhere. The church feared disorder. A single unfiled page threatened the illusion of perfect order, yet they did not destroy it. Instead, they set it aside, like a question no one dared answer. Perhaps they hoped time would fade it. Perhaps they trusted that someday, someone else would know what to do with it. Now, centuries later, here you are, the unfiled folio in your hands. The ink still speaks. The margins still wrestle. The silence still hums. You imagine the writer of these lines, perhaps a monk, perhaps a witness, perhaps someone who heard secondhand and burned to preserve it before it vanished. Alone by candlelight, quill scratching, heart pounding, uncertain if this was revelation or ruin, the act of writing itself became defiance. You trace the words again. It came in silence. Not with trumpets, not with choirs, not with proclamation. Silent, radiant, unmoving, undeniable, a light that entered without knocking, that stood without kneeling. The folio sits heavy in your lap. The corridor seems to lean closer. The lamp wavers, throwing shadows across the walls. The unfiled folio is more than paper. It is testimony to the Church's greatest fear, that truth may arrive uninvited, uncontainable, refusing to fit the shelves built to hold it. And now you understand. The folio remains unfiled because the story it carries is still unfolding. It waits for a world ready to receive it. It waits for eyes willing to see the visitor as it was, not as it was renamed. It waits for hearts willing to imagine salvation that comes not from within the walls of Rome, but from beyond the stars. Until then, it rests here, a seed in shadow, waiting. The room is dim, lit by candles that hiss and flicker against stone walls. Shadows climb upward like restless monks trying to escape the weight of silence. On one table rests a chalice, half polished, waiting for the morning mass. On another stands a telescope, brass shining in the candlelight, its lens tilted toward a narrow window cut into the ceiling. The two objects do not belong together, and yet they sit side by side. One is made for ritual, the other for exploration. One points downward, to earth, to bread, to wine. The other points upward, to stars, to planets, to secrets far beyond sight. But here, in this lonely chamber, they touch. You imagine a priest long ago, walking in slowly, lighting his candle, polishing the chalice, whispering a prayer under his breath. And then, as the prayer settles, he drifts toward the telescope. He places his eye against the cold metal, his breath fogging the glass for a moment, and he sees a sky no psalm has ever named. The candle flickers. The telescope shows a moving light, brighter than any star, wandering across the heavens. He pulls back. He breathes harder. He leans in again. The light remains, steady, unblinking, gliding with purpose. Not a comet, not a star, something else. He straightens, torn between the chalice and the telescope. The chalice tells him the ritual is enough. The telescope tells him the story is larger than he knows. His heart beats faster. He looks again. The light has shifted, dipped, then paused. He whispers a prayer, not from the book but from fear, or wonder, or both. For centuries, candles and telescopes have shared uneasy company. Faith and curiosity sit side by side, one asking for surrender, the other for sight. Yet sometimes, both lead to the same place, awe. The chalice holds mystery in liquid form. The telescope holds mystery in light. Both speak to a presence too great to name. But the danger lies here. If the telescope shows a visitor, radiant and near, what becomes of the chalice? If the sky reveals a Savior not of Bethlehem but of another world, what becomes of bread and wine, of keys and crowns? The priest, trembling, blows out his candle. He leaves the chalice for tomorrow. He covers the telescope with cloth, but he does not forget what he has seen. The light remains inside him, a fire no ritual can extinguish. You close your eyes and feel the weight of that conflict. Candles and telescopes, faith and sight, ritual and revelation. Perhaps they are not enemies but companions, each preparing the heart for the other. Perhaps the chalice was never meant to hold all of God. Perhaps the telescope was always meant to be another kind of prayer. The candle burns low. The telescope waits. The corridor hums softly, as if to remind you, both light and lens lead to the same horizon. The folio rests heavy in your hands. The words blur. The ink spreads, but the weight is not from the parchment. The weight comes from the knowledge that these scribes, centuries ago, were afraid of being wrong. Fear of misreading is ancient. To call a comet a sign of judgment, only to see it fade harmlessly, is to invite mockery. To call a dream divine, only to see it crumble, is to risk ruin. In the church, misreading was not only embarrassing, it was dangerous. It could fracture faith. It could end lives. And so the scribes learned to hedge their words, to soften, to leave space for reinterpretation. Perhaps, maybe, symbolic. Words that protect against error. Words that cover uncertainty like a veil. But here, in these pages, the fear is thicker. For what they saw could not be mistaken for cloud or star. It was too precise, too near, too present. And yet, to say it plainly was to risk heresy. To misread the visitor as divine could fracture the faith. To misread it as false could bury the truth. You imagine the scribe bent low, quill scratching, hands sweating, candle wax dripping onto the page. Every line a decision, every description a risk. Was it angel? Was it demon? Was it something else entirely? Each choice carried consequences. Each word could ignite a trial. The fear of misreading is also the fear of exposure. For once written, the words live beyond the writer. Once sealed, the record belongs to others. And others may not be kind. Perhaps this is why the margin notes argue. One voice says, angel. Another says, savior. A third whispers, silence. The folio becomes not one account but a battlefield of pens. Each hand afraid, each hand uncertain. You hold the page closer. The letters seem to shift under the lamplight, as if alive. And you realize, the true fear was not of being wrong. The true fear was of being right. If the visitor was real, if it was not of earth, if it carried light and power beyond all crowns, then the entire structure of faith would have to bend. And bending is harder than breaking. So the scribes hesitated. They softened. They whispered. They erased. Not because they lacked courage, but because they carried too much of it. To name the visitor rightly was to rewrite the world. The corridor presses in. The lamp flickers. The folio waits. And you, centuries later, read what they could not say aloud. The fear of misreading becomes your own. For you too must decide, do you call it angel or alien or Messiah? Or do you leave it unnamed and let the silence carry the weight? You return to the line again, the one written in darker ink, the one that cannot be softened. This is the crux, the heart, the wound. In every story of angelic visitation, the being bows to God, acknowledges authority, affirms the order of heaven. But this visitor did not. It stood upright, radiant, unmoved. Imagine the scene. A gathering of men robed in power, keys at their sides, crowns above their brows, incense heavy in the air. Into this space comes a figure of light. It does not prostrate itself. It does not chant prayers. It does not affirm the throne. It simply stands, silent, watching. The silence is unbearable. Authority demands recognition. Crowns demand respect. Yet the visitor neither obeys nor rebels. It simply exists. And its existence is enough to unravel the room. For centuries, faith has depended on order. God above, church below, people beneath. Authority flows downward like water through channels carefully dug. But the visitor was like rain that falls where it will, ignoring channels, nourishing earth freely. That freedom terrified those who held the keys. If light does not bow, what becomes of the throne? If salvation comes from beyond, untethered to lineage, what becomes of tradition? If grace walks in without kneeling, what becomes of the crowns polished for centuries? The scribes feared this more than heresy. They feared irrelevance. For if the visitor carried within itself the authority of heaven, then no human institution could claim monopoly over truth. You close your eyes and imagine standing in that room. Would you have demanded the visitor kneel? Or would you have felt the liberation in its stillness, the freedom in its silence? Perhaps the visitor came not to rebel, but to reveal that divinity needs no posture, no crown, no chain of command. Divinity simply island. The words echo in your mind. It did not kneel. And you wonder if that refusal was not arrogance, but compassion. A way of showing humanity that kneeling was never required. That salvation was not submission, but awakening. The corridor breathes around you. The lamp trembles, throwing shadows that sway like figures bowing and rising again. And you realize, when light does not bow, it teaches us to stand. The page in your hand grows heavier. You trace the margin notes again, and they feel less like fear, more like prophecy. For one day, when the sky opens again and the visitor returns, perhaps the question will not be, why did it not kneel? But why did we ever think it must? The corridor waits with its dim light. But your mind now wanders to the choices made long before you arrived here. Centuries ago, when the first account of the visitor was copied onto parchment, the decision was not only to record, but to hide. That choice became policy. Silence itself became strategy. In the church, silence was never emptiness. It was shield, weapon, sanctuary. To speak too soon could spark fires that would not be controlled. To reveal too much could scatter the faithful, confuse the weak, embolden the proud. And so, silence was chosen, not always as deception, but as preservation. Yet you wonder, preservation of what? Was it faith they wished to protect? Or power? You imagine a council gathered in secret, the ink still wet on the page describing the visitor. One man argues for burning the record, another pleads for study, a third insists on silence. The people cannot carry this, he says. The shepherds must guard it until the time is right. Heads nod. The vote is taken. The seal is pressed into wax. The page disappears into shadow. It is easy, centuries later, to accuse them of fear. Yet in their silence, perhaps they believed they were saving souls. A single word of an alien savior could have torn apart a fragile world already trembling with wars, plagues, and doubts. Better, they thought, to wait, better to bury the page in silence, as one buries a seed in the soil. But silence changes shape with time. What begins as protection becomes suppression. What begins as caution becomes control. By keeping the page sealed, the church preserved not only faith, but its own throne. For to admit the visitor was to admit that keys and crowns may not be final. You hold the folio in your hands, feeling the centuries of silence pressed into its fibers. The words are faint, but the silence is louder. The silence is what endured, and here is the paradox. Silence can keep truth hidden, but it also keeps it alive. By refusing to destroy the page, the church ensured its survival. By choosing silence, they guaranteed that one day, someone like you would read it. Perhaps silence was not only policy. Perhaps silence was prophecy. You breathe deeply. The corridor exhales with you. The lamp flickers, and in its dim glow, the silence speaks louder than words. The time of concealment always ends. Long before seals and councils, long before marble corridors and guarded archives, there were fields. Night stretched wide above shepherds tending flocks, their faces turned upward to constellations that pulsed like living script. The first theology was not written in books, but in stars. You imagine a man lying on his back in the grass, listening to sheep stir around him, his eyes fixed on a cluster of moving lights. He does not call them comets. He does not name them planets. He simply knows them as visitors. For in those early nights, the sky was not decoration. It was conversation. Stories grew from these watchful hours. Lights became messengers. Strangers became guides. Voices in dreams became laws for tribes. The shepherds of the ancient world were not only keepers of flocks, they were keepers of sky. And when the church began to form, it inherited these older sky stories. Angels descending, wheels of fire, ladders reaching upward, all echoes of shepherds who once looked up and whispered names into the darkness. But in the archives, those raw visions were tamed. A comet was no longer a visitor, but a sign of judgment. A fire in the heavens was no longer a presence, but a parable. The wildness of the sky was bound with doctrine so that faith could remain orderly. Still, the shepherd's eyes remain within us. Even now, centuries later, we stand at windows, gaze at planets, listen for whispers in the dark. The instinct to look upward cannot be erased. The folio in your hands describes the visitor as brighter than flame, yet no smoke, no heat. It echoes those earliest voices who spoke of fire that does not burn, light that does not blind, presence that does not harm. To them, such a sight was not threat, but guidance. The visitor was not enemy, it was shepherd of a greater flock. You picture those star shepherds speaking softly to one another. Do not fear, this light walks with us. Their faith did not require crowns or keys. Their faith required only the night sky and the courage to listen. The church feared that courage, for it could not be controlled. Shepherd faith belonged to everyone. Archive faith belonged to a few. But as you read the margin notes, as you feel the pages tremble in your hands, you realize the shepherd's vision still breathes here. Their trust in the sky still lingers, waiting for those who will look upward not with fear, but with wonder. You breathe deeply. Outside the window, the stars shine unchanged, as though they, too, are waiting for us to remember. The page before you describes light, movement, brilliance, and though the word alien does not appear, the language echoes something older visions that once spoke of wheels of fire, turning endlessly in the sky. Long ago, prophets described strange vehicles in words they barely understood. Wheels within wheels, rims full of eyes, flames that did not consume. To the modern mind, they are symbols, metaphors, poetic ways of speaking of divine mystery. But to those who first recorded them, they were memory, something seen, something experienced, something undeniable. The church inherited those visions and polished them into doctrine. The wheels of fire became angelic chariots. The burning forms became metaphors of glory. The strangeness was tamed. The danger was calmed. But the folio in your hands resists taming. Its words are too raw, too specific. It moved with will, not wind. It turned without sound, yet the air trembled. It glowed, but no smoke rose. These lines echo the old prophets too clearly to be ignored. They suggest continuity, not invention. That across centuries, across cultures, the same presence has appeared, cloaked in fire and silence, always described with the same reaching language. You imagine the witness of this folio standing beneath a sky torn open by light. The figure descends, radiant, framed by something circular, spinning, alive, not angel, not star, something in between, a wheel of fire. The witness writes quickly, hands unsteady, words half-formed. Later, the margins soften it, reshape it, whisper, angel. But the raw words remain, wheels that turn where no road exists, fire that burns without ash, presence that bows to no throne. Why would such visions return again and again through history? Perhaps the visitor comes not once, but many times. Perhaps the sky has always carried saviors, teachers, messengers, each cloaked in forms we can barely describe. The church feared this pattern, for if the visitor appeared before Bethlehem, and after, and again, then the story of salvation is larger than one time, one place, one crown. It is woven into the sky itself. You look up through the corridor window. The stars glimmer. You wonder if, even now, wheels of fire turn above us, unseen, waiting for the moment when eyes and hearts are ready. The lamp beside you sputters. Shadows ripple like spokes turning on stone. And you feel it. The story is not finished. The wheels still burn. The fire still waits. The visitor still comes. The page before you is faint, its words thin with age, but the imagery burns clear. It speaks of ladders rising into the night, reaching far beyond sight. Not wooden steps, not stone stairs, but beams of light, shimmering as though woven between earth and sky. The scribes who copied this page would have known the story of Jacob's dream, the ladder upon which angels ascended and descended. To them, ladders were not structures of stone, but bridges of presence, a way for heaven to reach downward, and for humanity to reach upward. You imagine a witness lying in a chamber, eyes half closed, when suddenly light streamed from the sky, straight and bright, alive with motion. Figures moved along it, not climbing, not descending, but flowing, as if gravity itself had forgotten its role. A ladder not built of rungs but of radiance. The description is simple. A stair of fire, without smoke, without ash, filled with voices, though none were heard. The margin adds, perhaps vision, perhaps dream. Yet the lines resist dismissal. The witness did not call it dream. The witness said it appeared in silence, not sleep. You close your eyes and see it. A ladder stretching upward, not into clouds but into darkness, each step pulsing like a heartbeat, each step promising passage. Would you climb? Would you place your foot upon the first glowing rung and let yourself be carried upward? Or would you remain rooted, afraid of leaving earth behind? The church, centuries ago, faced the same question. To name such ladders as visions was safe. To name them as doorways was dangerous. For if heaven opens freely, then crowns and keys no longer guard the way. A ladder of light makes every soul its own pilgrim, every seeker its own priest. The scribes softened the words. They whispered of allegory. They said, dream. Yet in the faint ink, you sense more. You sense the witness trembling, not with sleep, but with awe. A ladder that burned without burning. A ladder that carried voices without sound. A ladder that did not end in the sky, but somewhere beyond. Perhaps these ladders are not visions at all. Perhaps they are invitations. You rest the page back upon the stack. The corridor hums around you, and the lamp glows with a steady flame. For a moment, you imagine light spilling from above, a bridge lowering in silence, ready to carry you upward. You breathe slowly, as though you, too, are preparing to climb. The chamber grows still, but the silence is not empty. It carries a murmur, a low vibration that seems to echo from the stones themselves. You lean closer to the page, and the words speak not of ladders now, but of voices. Voices heard in the night. The account is brief but vivid. They spoke without mouth, they sang without tongue, we heard, though no sound was made. The margins are crowded with corrections, desperate attempts to soften the strangeness. Perhaps dream. Perhaps angelic choir. Perhaps only imagination. Yet the witness insisted, we were awake. We were awake. You imagine the moment. A small group of monks resting in the stillness of night. Candles low. Prayers ended. Then, without warning, a vibration fills the room. Not music, not thunder, but something between. A resonance that shakes the chest, not the air. They look at one another, wide-eyed, lips unmoving, ears unstruck. Yet the message is heard. What kind of presence speaks without words? What kind of voice is received not by the ears but by the soul? The scribes feared this question. For if voices can be heard without scripture, if words can be received without clergy, then authority unravels. Every soul becomes its own sanctuary. Every ear becomes a temple. To acknowledge such voices was to risk a world where divine truth arrived directly, bypassing the throne. And yet, the page remains. The witness refused to erase. The words are fragile, but they linger. We heard. We were awake. You close your eyes and imagine hearing such a voice. No accent, no language, yet perfectly understood. A message not translated, but known. Perhaps it would say, do not fear. Perhaps it would say, you are not alone. Or perhaps it would speak no words at all, only presence, only assurance, only a truth that needs no sentence. The church softened these stories into parables. They spoke of angelic choirs, heavenly hymns, sacred whispers and dreams. But the witness knew better. The witness felt vibration in the bones, not in the ears. The witness knew the message was not song but signal. You open your eyes. The corridor hums faintly, as if alive. The lamp flickers, then steadies. And for a moment you wonder if you, too, are hearing voices in the night. The pages shift again, and now they speak not of ladders or voices, but of encounters. Strangers at the gate. The words are careful, hesitant, but the story beneath them is clear. It describes a visitor arriving at dusk, when the sky burned gold, and the bells called evening prayer. A figure stood at the gate of a monastery, cloaked in light, though no torch burned. The porter, startled, asked for name and blessing. The figure spoke neither. It only raised its hand, palm forward. As if in peace, the porter froze. The rules were strict. Strangers must declare their name, their purpose, their faith. But this stranger gave no name. It stood silent, radiant, waiting. The porter felt no threat, yet also no submission. Finally, he opened the gate. The figure entered. Inside, the monks gathered, uncertain. The stranger did not eat, did not drink, did not kneel at prayer. It simply sat in stillness, light glowing faintly from its form. One monk swore he saw its eyes reflect stars. Another whispered that the air around it shimmered, as though space itself bent. The record ends quickly. We feared to write more. Yet the margins betray what was hidden. One hand scrawled, "Not angel, not man, not spirit. Stranger." Another, bolder, dared to add, "Perhaps the one, hospitality was sacred. To welcome the stranger was to welcome God." Yet what happens when the stranger does not fit any category? When the guest glows with light but refuses all ritual? To welcome such a presence is to admit that the gates of faith are already open, wider than imagined. The monks debated. Some wished to drive it away. Others wished to worship. In the end, silence won. The stranger departed as quietly as it came, leaving no trace but the trembling of the witnesses. You imagine standing at that gate, hand on the iron lock, the sky burning red. Would you open? Would you trust? Would you allow light to enter, even if it refused to bow? The church, faced with such accounts, chose caution. They spoke of strangers as angels in disguise, tests of hospitality, parables of kindness. But the raw witness is harder to tame. A stranger who glows, who sits without eating, who bends to no ritual that is not parable. That is presence. And so the record hides in silence, preserved but unnamed. Yet as you read, you feel the air around you shift, as if, even now, strangers wait at gates, glowing quietly, testing not our rituals but our welcome. The corridor is still. The lamp flickers. You glance toward the darkened doorway at the end of the hall. For just a moment you wonder, if you opened it now, what stranger might be waiting there, patient, radiant, ready to step through. The folio shifts, and with it, memory of another story rises. The words are faint, but the shape of them is familiar. 3 figures approaching, each carrying something in their hands. It is not Bethlehem. It is not a manger. It is older, stranger, preserved in whispers that echo through many cultures. The page describes visitors arriving under starlight, bearing objects not of gold, not of frankincense, not of myrrh, but something that glowed, something that pulsed faintly in the dark. The scribe calls them tres munera, 3 gifts. The witnesses stood in awe, uncertain whether they were offerings or instruments. One glowed like amber, one hummed like metal, one reflected light though no flame was near. The church knew well the power of the story of 3 gifts. It tied the foreign to the holy, made outsiders into worshippers, transformed strangeness into confirmation. But here, the record feels different. These were not kings bowing before a child. These were strangers arriving with objects of power, not for worship, but for exchange. The margin softens, perhaps symbolic. Another hand adds, "Remind of Magi." But the deeper tone lingers. What if the story of the Magi itself was echo, not origin? What if the tale of travelers from afar carrying gifts was already old when Bethlehem's star rose? 3 gifts. Always 3. Not because of number alone, but because 3 binds. Past, present, future, body, mind, spirit, heaven, earth, cosmos. To arrive with three is to complete. To arrive with three is to seal meaning into gesture. You imagine standing at the threshold, watching as figures in light approach, each carrying something radiant. Would you dare to accept them? Would you understand them? Or would you, like the monks of old, try to rename them into safer objects, into familiar story, into myth? The gifts remain mysterious. The folio does not say what became of them, only that they were received with trembling. Did they vanish? Were they locked away? Or do they still rest somewhere in a hidden vault, glowing faintly in the silence, waiting for recognition? 3 gifts, 3 signs, 3 reminders that salvation has always arrived not from the familiar, but from the foreign. And perhaps the church feared not the gifts themselves, but what they implied. That the visitor did not come empty-handed. That the visitor offered not just presence, but power. You trace the faded lines with your finger. The corridor hums around you. The lamp flickers, and for a moment, you imagine those 3 gifts glowing still, their light reaching across centuries, waiting for the moment when hands are ready to hold them without fear. Another page lies beneath, thicker, heavier, almost brittle. The words here are written in a different hand, sharper, angled, as though the writer pressed hard against resistance. The subject is not gifts now, but maps. Maps drawn not of seas, not of mountains, but of stars. The scribe describes circles sketched in ink, lines crossing between points of light, figures traced across the heavens, not constellations known to us, but patterns unfamiliar, as though someone had charted a sky from another world. In the margins, notes argue, too fanciful, perhaps symbolic only, but the precision betrays more. The church had long inherited maps from older traditions, astrologers, seers, shepherds. They turned those maps into calendars, feast days, sacred times. But these maps resist ritual. They point not to seasons, but to directions. They look less like calendars and more like instructions. You hold the page closer. The ink forms a spiral, moving outward from a central star. Around it, circles ripple like waves. The scribe describes them as Va Kali, paths of heaven. The handwriting trembles. Not our constellations, unknown. You imagine a witness standing beneath the night sky, watching as lights move not randomly, not like stars fixed in place, but like travelers tracing paths. They sketch what they see quickly, knowing the pattern will fade. Later, in candlelight, the map is copied into folio, preserved though not understood. Maps of wonder, not guides to trade routes, not guides to seas, guides to possibility, guides to a sky that is not empty, but filled with paths. The church feared maps like these, for if the heavens carried instructions, then salvation was not fixed. It was not one time, one place, one nation. It was ongoing. The map suggested more visits, more arrivals, more strangers bearing light, and such a thought unraveled the idea of exclusivity. The margin scribbles grow frantic. Symbolic, symbolic, symbolic. But the maps remain. Circles and spirals drawn with trembling care, refusing to fade. You close your eyes and imagine following those paths, lifting your gaze to a sky alive with motion. What would it mean if the stars were not only background, but corridors? What would it mean if the visitor came not once, but often? Walking the very maps that lie hidden here, you breathe deeply. The corridor shifts around you, as though space itself bends with the thought. The lamp flickers. The map quivers in your hand, and you know, wonder was always meant to be guide. Wonder was always meant to be map. The next page is less orderly, the ink smeared, the lines crooked. It seems to have been written in haste, as though the scribe was recording even while trembling. The subject is simple, yet profound. Light that moves. The text begins, "It was not star, it was not flame. It moved against the sky with will, not with wind." The description grows frantic, repeating, "It moved. It moved." The scribe insists on the difference. Stars do not move. Flames do not travel steadily across the sky. Yet this light moved, deliberately, silently, with intention. The margin note is cautious. Perhaps comet. Another hand adds, perhaps illusion. Yet the main hand insists, no. It paused. It turned. It returned. You imagine the night of this sighting. A group of monks standing in the cloister, heads tilted back, eyes wide. Above them, a light brighter than Venus, gliding slowly, then stopping, holding, waiting. One monk gasps, another crosses himself. The youngest whispers, "Angel." The eldest shakes his head, whispering only, "Not of earth." The light remains, unmoving now, as if listening. Then, as though satisfied, it shifts again, gliding across the sky until it vanishes behind a line of clouds. The witnesses write what they can, but words fail. Stars are fixed. Fire flickers. Only living things move with will. To say the light moved is to say it was alive, or guided, or both. And that thought unsettled the church. For if light itself can move freely, what becomes of heaven's order? If salvation is not anchored to earth but travels as it pleases, what becomes of doctrine? The church feared not the movement itself, but what it implied. That God's presence was not bound to altar or throne, but free, untethered, sovereign. You hold the page carefully. The ink smears faintly on your fingertips. The words are desperate, but the meaning is clear. Light moved. It paused. It chose. You close your eyes and imagine standing beneath that sky, the light hovering, waiting, almost inviting. Would you feel fear? Or would you feel awe? Would you cross yourself in terror? Or lift your hands in welcome? The corridor hums faintly. The lamp trembles. And you realize, perhaps the light has always moved. Perhaps the stars we think are fixed are only waiting for us to notice when they shift. Perhaps the visitor was never bound to Bethlehem, nor to Rome, nor to any one place at all. Perhaps salvation has always been light that moves. The folio quivers in your hands. The ink is faded, the parchment thin. Yet the weight of its words presses heavy. Again and again, the text circles one central difficulty: what to call the presence they witnessed. No name was safe. No name was complete. Every name threatened to bind what refused to be bound. The witnesses tried. They reached for the familiar. Angel, spirit, messenger. But each word collapsed under its own limits. Angel implied hierarchy. Wings, a clear tie to heaven's throne. The visitor bore none of these. Spirit implied formlessness, vapor, something intangible. Yet the visitor stood radiant, present, undeniable. Messenger implied it carried words, commands, decrees. Yet it spoke nothing. Its silence was message enough. So what name could hold it? The margins reveal the struggle. One hand, bold, wrote Salvator. Another scratched it out. A softer hand replaced it with hospice, stranger, guest. Another scrawled Lux Peregrina, wandering light. Still another wrote, only, non homines, not of man. Each name carried risk. To call it savior was to dethrone tradition. To call it stranger was to admit ignorance. To call it wandering light was to reduce it to symbol. Yet the presence resisted symbol. It was not metaphor. It was event. You close your eyes and imagine the room where the witnesses sat in debate. Voices hushed, candles sputtering. A young monk, face flushed, insists, "It was the Christ, returned." An older one shakes his head. "Blasphemy." Another whispers, "It was angel." Another hisses, "No angel refuses to bow." Silence falls. The only sound is the scratching of quills, each hand offering names, each name failing. The truth is clear. Naming is power. To name something is to place it within a frame, to control it, to decide its role. The visitor defied control. It resisted the power of naming. It stood silent, radiant, immune to categories. Perhaps this was its message. Do not name me. Do not box me. Do not tame me. Simply receive me. But the church could not live with namelessness. Doctrine depends on definition. Creeds depend on clarity. Faith, to be guarded, must be named. And so, names were whispered, scratched, debated, softened, but none endured. The visitor remained unfiled, unnamed, unclaimed, and now, centuries later, you sit with the same struggle. Do you dare name it? Alien? Messiah? Stranger? Savior? Or do you let the silence carry it? As it was, beyond words, the corridor hums. The lamp trembles. The page in your hand glows faintly with candlelight, and you realize some presences cannot be named. They can only be remembered. The next page bears scars. Whole lines have been scraped away with knife, leaving pale streaks across the parchment. Others are blacked out with heavy ink, thick strokes covering what once lived beneath. This is no accident. This is redaction. You run your fingers lightly over the grooves where words once were. You cannot read them, but you feel their ghost. Redaction is not erasure. It is a scar that reveals its own violence. The margins whisper, "Too dangerous. Too bold." One note adds, "For preservation, not for flame." These were not careless edits. They were deliberate wounds, inflicted to keep the page alive while stripping it of teeth. What did they cut away? Perhaps a direct naming of the visitor as savior. Perhaps a description too vivid, too unmistakable, too heretical to survive. Perhaps testimony that the visitor blessed them, spoke to them, touched them. Whatever it was judged unbearable. You imagine the redactor's hand. A monk sits at a desk, knife in hand, scraping carefully, heart pounding. He mutters a prayer, not against evil, but against consequence. The knife squeals softly against parchment. Ink dust falls like ash. The dangerous words vanish, replaced by silence. But why not burn the whole page? Why not destroy it outright? Because even in fear, they sensed value. They could not bear to erase the memory completely. They chose instead to silence it partially, leaving enough to hint, enough to survive, enough for future eyes. Redaction becomes paradox. It hides and preserves at once. It silences and speaks. It erases, but it also points to what it erases. The empty space cries louder than ink. You hold the page up to the lamp. For a moment, faint lines shimmer through the scraped surface. You glimpse fragments, words half gone, shapes of letters. You think you see Gloria, glory. You think you see non-terrena, not earthly. But then the page shifts and the ghost vanishes. The church feared raw testimony. They feared words that could not be explained away. So they redacted. They softened. They dulled the sharp edge. And in doing so, they left us not clarity, but mystery. You close your eyes. You imagine the original words glowing beneath, waiting for the day someone might restore them. Perhaps the visitor itself, if it returns, will reveal what was cut away. Until then, the scars remain, louder than words. The corridor sighs. The lamp flickers. And you, holding the wounded page, feel the tension of all history, the struggle to reveal, the urge to conceal. The next folio is different. Less record, more meditation. The handwriting flows softer, slower, as though the scribe wrote not in haste but in reflection. The subject is not vision, not visitor, but the mind itself. As the body sleeps, the text begins. The mind walks in gardens. It speaks of night as fertile soil, a place where seeds of thought are planted and bloom unseen. It suggests that encounters with the visitor may not always occur in waking vision, but in dreams. That the mind itself may become a gate. You pause, remembering the long traditions of monks who practiced night vigils, prayers whispered in twilight, meditations carried into slumber. For them, sleep was not waste, but threshold, a place where the divine could whisper freely, unchallenged by reason. The page describes a garden seen by many witnesses, not earthly, not bounded by walls, but vast, filled with trees whose leaves shimmered with starlight. In this garden, they met figures of light, not angels, not saints, strangers radiant and silent, planting seeds into the soil of their minds. The margin notes are cautious, symbolic only. Yet the main text resists allegory. We woke with knowledge we did not have. We woke with peace beyond measure. We woke with visions that unfolded true. You close your eyes and picture it. A midnight garden, leaves glowing, paths winding. a fountain whose water reflects stars not seen on earth. In this place, the visitor walks. It kneels not in worship but in planting seeds of thought, seeds of awakening. The church struggled with such accounts. Dreams could not be catalogued. They could not be controlled. To admit the garden was real was to admit that each sleeper could meet the visitor in their own night, without gate, without guard, without permission. And so, again, silence. But the page survives. Its words linger like fragrance. And you realize, perhaps the true archive is not in Rome, not in stone, not in parchment. Perhaps the true archive is in the gardens of the mind, where the visitor continues to plant seeds every night. You breathe deeply. The corridor seems to soften, as though walls fall away, as though stars grow nearer. The lamp flickers, its glow bending into patterns like leaves. For a moment, you wonder if you yourself are walking in that midnight garden, guided by a presence who needs no name. And you understand, the visitor has never left. It walks still, in silence, planting in the fertile soil of dreaming minds, waiting for the harvest of awakening. The folio before you changes tone again. The words are not narrative now, but drawings. Circles, intersecting, triangles within circles, spirals curling outward into infinity, diagrams, carefully inked, each line measured with steady precision. Beside them, the scribe has written small notes, describing what these shapes meant to those who witnessed the visitor. It begins simply. The heavens are not chaos, they are order, written in fire. For centuries, faith has spoken of heaven as realm of angels, place of light, throne of God. But here, the heavens are described as design. Stars are not scattered, but arranged. Light moves along hidden paths. Presence descends where geometry allows. You trace the lines with your finger. Circles within circles, intersecting perfectly. A triangle pointing upward, mirrored by one pointing down. Between them, a diamond-shaped figure, glowing faintly with dots marked as stars. The scribe explains, we saw not just light but pattern. The visitor came by measure, not chance. The margin tries to soften it, perhaps symbolic, not literal. But the precision resists. These are not symbols. They are maps. You imagine the witnesses standing beneath the night sky, watching as lights arrange themselves into forms perfect circles, triangles, spirals. Not random twinkling, but deliberate motion, like an architect laying foundations. The visitor's descent was not sudden, but aligned. It entered where lines crossed, where patterns opened. Sacred geometry, the order beneath appearances. A language older than words. Speaking through shape, the church inherited geometry through sacred art rose windows, cathedral arches, mandalas traced in stone. Yet those were symbols meant to point inward, not outward. This folio suggests the reverse, that geometry in the heavens was doorway. That the same circles carved into cathedral glass were reflections of real structures in the sky. You imagine a star map drawn by hands trembling in awe. Circles for orbits, triangles for descent, spirals for return. A system of paths, alive with meaning. The visitor did not come by accident. It came by design. The question is unavoidable. If the heavens are patterned, if visitors follow measure, then perhaps they have always been near, moving unseen, waiting for the right alignment to appear. You close your eyes and see the geometry extend beyond the page. You see circles ripple through space. Spirals turn endlessly. Triangles converge. In the center stands the visitor, radiant, still, waiting for humanity to notice that the sky has never been random. The corridor hums softly. The lamp trembles. And you realize, geometry is not only structure. Geometry is invitation. The next page is softer, its ink faded, its words flowing almost like poetry. It describes not one witness, but many. Not one dream, but shared dreams. A collective experience, whispered across nights, connecting those who never spoke to each other in waking hours. The text begins. We dreamed alike, the scribe explains. In one monastery, 5 monks dreamed the same vision, A garden of starlight, a figure radiant, silent, unmoving. In another, a convent of sisters saw the same ladder of fire on the same night. Across miles, across silence, the same images bloomed in minds like flowers opening under the same Sunday. Shared dreams, collective consciousness. The witnesses were shaken, for dreams are private, fragile, fleeting. Yet here, they were shared, confirmed, repeated. Not illusion, not coincidence. A message carried through the soil of the mind, blooming simultaneously in many hearts. The margins are crowded. Perhaps hysteria, perhaps suggestion. Yet the records say the witnesses had not spoken. They could not have shared such detail. The dreams were seeds planted not by each other, but by something greater. You imagine the monks waking, rushing to the refectory, trembling, realizing their dreams were the same. You imagine the sisters whispering in the morning light, tears streaming, recognizing that what they had seen was no longer private but woven into the fabric of community. The church feared such accounts. For if the visitor could plant dreams in many minds, then authority could not control the message. Dreams need no priest, no altar, no book. Dreams carry truth directly. Collective dreams carry revolution. And so, the records were softened, explained away as metaphor. But the witnesses knew. They felt the presence ripple through them like music played across many strings at once. They understood that dreams were not private at all. They were threads in a greater tapestry, woven by hands beyond human. You close your eyes and imagine being part of that dream. You see the garden, the ladder, the light. You look around and realize you are not alone. Others are here too, faces you have never seen. Strangers yet kin, all dreaming together, all receiving the same vision. Perhaps this is how the visitor still works through collective dream, through symbols whispered into many minds at once, preparing humanity not through decree, but through resonance. The corridor is silent now, as if listening. The lamp flickers gently, and you, holding this fragile page, feel as though even your own dreams are no longer yours alone, but part of a greater field. The final folio in this drawer is darker. Its words carry a trembling tone. It does not describe a vision, or a gift, or a dream. It describes something harder, the rewriting of memory. The scribe confesses, "We remembered differently after. The past was not as it had been." The account explains that after the visitor appeared, witnesses found their memories shifting. Events once clear became altered. Conversations recalled with certainty were suddenly different. Some remembered the visitor entering through a window. Others swore it appeared in the cloister. Both insisted they were right. Both wept when they realized their memories no longer agreed. The margin whispers. Confusion. Danger. Yet the text itself insists. It was not confusion. It was correction. You pause, letting the words settle. Correction of memory. As if the visitor not only revealed itself but rewrote the past to prepare the present. As if the timeline itself bent under its presence, reshaping events so they aligned with a greater story. You imagine waking one morning to find that the memory of yesterday has changed. Not completely, only subtly. A word different. A gesture altered. A path once closed, now open. At first, you doubt yourself. But then you see others share the same shift. And slowly, you realize your memories are not private. They are clay, molded by a force beyond you. The witnesses feared this. For if memory itself can be altered, what of history? What of scripture? What of tradition? If the visitor can revise the past, then no record is safe. And yet, perhaps this was its gift, to free humanity from chains of story, to remind us that history is not stone but water. The church, faced with such accounts, could not allow them to spread. To admit revision was to admit fragility, so they silenced, redacted, sealed. But the page survives. Its trembling words confess what doctrine cannot, that reality itself may shift under the hand of presence. You close your eyes and imagine the moment the witnesses realized their memories no longer agreed. At first, terror. Then, slowly, wonder. For if memory can change, perhaps destiny can too. If the past is not fixed, then neither is the future. The corridor seems to lean in around you. The lamp burns low, casting long shadows that ripple like shifting recollections. You hold the page tighter, feeling its weight not as parchment, but as possibility. Revision of memory. Perhaps not curse, but mercy. Perhaps the visitor came not to erase, but to heal, to soften wounds, to rewrite scars, to give humanity a gentler past so it might walk into a freer future. The lamp flickers once more. The page trembles, and you wonder how much of what you remember tonight is already being revised. The folio in your hands feels lighter than the others, though its ink is no less faded. The words seem to breathe differently, less burdened by fear, more filled with reverence. It does not describe visions of fire or ladders of light, but something gentler, something that changed the witnesses from within. It begins simply, "We gave thanks." The account tells of a night when the visitor did not descend in brilliance, nor move across the heavens with strange geometry, but instead stood in silence among those who prayed. No words, no gestures, no demands, only presence. And as the monks knelt together in the chapel, they felt their hearts flood with a sensation they struggled to describe. The scribe calls it amplificatio gratiarum, amplification of gratitude. They had spoken words of thanks countless times before. Thanks for bread, thanks for breath, thanks for day and night. But this night, in the presence of the visitor, their gratitude grew larger than themselves. It spread like light through water, filling every space, connecting every soul. They felt gratitude not only for what they knew, but for all that ever was, for stars, for silence, for strangers yet unborn. The margin softens. Perhaps ecstasy. Another note. Perhaps divine consolation. Yet the scribe's words resist such categories. It was not ecstasy, for ecstasy fades. It was not consolation, for consolation comforts. This was expansion. Gratitude without end. You imagine sitting in that chapel, candle flames steady, the air trembling with unseen presence. At first, your thanks are small, whispered. But then, like a river breaking its banks, gratitude overwhelms you. You thank not only for what is yours, but for what belongs to others. You thank not only for gifts, but for trials. You thank not only for life, but for death that folds it in mystery. And as you thank, you realize the thanks is not yours at all. It is the visitor's, flowing through you. The church could not easily teach such a thing. Gratitude in sermons was framed as duty, discipline, practice. But here, gratitude became force. It was not taught, but transmitted. It shook the witnesses until their very cells seemed to pulse with light. The scribe concludes with trembling. We understood then that gratitude is the true key. With it, all doors open. You rest the page against your lap, breathing slowly. Gratitude, amplified by presence. Gratitude, carried beyond self. Gratitude, not as polite prayer, but as cosmic resonance. The corridor seems softer now, the lamps glow warmer. For a moment you feel your own heart echo with that same expansion, and you realize, perhaps the visitor has never left. Perhaps it waits in silence each night, ready to amplify the gratitude of anyone who dares to whisper thanks. The next page is darker in tone, not because of fear, but because of its vastness. The words spill wide, unable to contain the vision they describe. It begins, "We saw no end." The witnesses recount a night when the heavens themselves seemed to split open. Not with fire, not with thunder, but with boundless possibility. The sky above them shimmered, layered with visions of lives unlived, choices unchosen, futures yet unborn. They describe it as a veil torn, revealing infinite threads weaving and unweaving, each thread a version of reality. The visitor stood at the center, silent as always, radiant yet calm. Around it, threads bent, reformed, rearranged. The witnesses felt themselves dissolve into the vision, seeing not one life but many, not one path but countless. One monk swore he saw himself as a father of children he never had. Another wept as she saw herself healed of wounds that had shaped her life. Another laughed, for he glimpsed himself walking paths of joy his waking mind had never dared to dream. The margin notes struggle. Illusion. dream only. But the main text insists, we were awake. You close your eyes and imagine such a moment. The sky above you filled with infinite reflections, each possibility as vivid as your own heartbeat. You feel the pull of one life, then another, then another. Some heavy, some light, some rich with sorrow, others with laughter. And in the center, the visitor, silent, steady, reminding you that all are true, all are real, all are possible. The church could not permit such testimony to spread. For infinite possibility undermines order. Doctrine depends on one path, one truth, one salvation. But here, the witnesses claim to have seen many. Not chaos, but abundance. Not confusion, but freedom. The scribe writes carefully, we understood then that what we call impossible is merely unseen. All is already written. All waits to be chosen. You feel the words echo inside you. If reality is not fixed, if all futures exist, then salvation is not a single event, but a constant invitation. The visitor becomes not judge, not king, but guide through infinity. The page trembles in your hand. The corridor seems to stretch wider, as though walls are bending into endless halls. The lamp flickers, its light splitting into many shadows at once. And you know, the testimony is true. There are infinite possibilities, infinite selves, infinite worlds. And the visitor stands silently at the threshold of each, waiting for us to step forward. The next folio is delicate, edges worn, its script faint but legible. It describes something less visible than ladders or gifts, yet more intimate. It speaks of energy, the invisible radiance that each person carries. Every soul, it begins, sings. The scribe explains that when the visitor appeared, it did not only radiate light outward, it also awakened light within the witnesses. They describe feeling their own presence shift, their bodies vibrating, their thoughts humming with frequency. One writes, we glowed, we felt it, we became luminous, though no eye could see. This was not metaphor. They swore their very beings changed. Old fear dissolved, heavy sorrow lifted, doubt quieted. In its place came a frequency, steady and golden, pulsing through their veins like living fire. The margin whispers, perhaps rapture. But again, the main text resists. No, it remained after. Not rapture, not passing. Signature. Signature. A lasting mark, like seal pressed into wax. The witnesses claimed that after the encounter, they carried the resonance forward. Their voices changed. Their presence shifted. People near them felt calmer, lighter, more open. It was as though the visitor had imprinted them with its own frequency, leaving them as transmitters of unseen light. You imagine walking through the cloister after such a night, your steps slow, your heart radiant. People glance at you and cannot explain why they feel peace in your presence. You yourself do not force it. You simply carry it, a signature woven into your soul. The church struggled with such testimony. For if the visitor imprinted each witness, then authority no longer flowed only from keys and crowns. It flowed through anyone touched by presence. It made ordinary monks, ordinary sisters, into living conduits of grace. And such decentralization threatened order. The scribe concludes gently, we are signatures of what we meet. To meet light is to become light. You rest the page against your chest. The corridor hums faintly, as though responding to your own heartbeat. The lamp glows steadily, not flickering now, but pulsing like a living thing. And you realize, perhaps the visitor did not come to display power, but to awaken it within us. Signature, resonance, frequency. The visitor may depart, but its imprint remains, carried in the silent vibration of those who dared to stand in its light. You close your eyes, breathing deeply, and feel it. A faint hum in your own chest, a warmth that was not there before. Perhaps the folio is right. Every soul sings, and once awakened, that song never fades. The folio you lift now feels fragile, as if touched too many times by hands that trembled. Its words are written with hesitation, each line pausing mid-stroke as though the scribe feared to commit the thought. Yet the story is there, waiting beneath the faded ink. It speaks not of ladders or dreams this time, but of signs. Signs too precise to be coincidence, too woven to be ignored. It begins with a simple observation. After the light, the world answered. The witnesses describe a season when everything around them seemed to arrange itself in harmony. Birds circled at strange hours. Bells tolled without hands pulling their ropes. Shadows on walls formed symbols they had never carved. Each small event could have been dismissed alone, but together they formed a pattern, a rhythm, a song. One monk tells of praying for clarity, then finding his path blocked by a branch shaped like a cross. Another writes of speaking, a doubt aloud, only to hear the same words echoed by a stranger passing the gate. A sister describes walking in the garden, seeing butterflies gather into a shape that mirrored the sacred seal of her order. The scribe calls it Concordia Signorum, the orchestration of signs. Not miracles in the dramatic sense, but subtle movements of reality, arranging themselves in response to presence. The margin attempts to soften. Coincidence, mind-seeking pattern. But the witnesses reject that. The signs were not sought, they write. You imagine such a season. You wake one morning, unsettled, questioning. You step outside and see the sky lined with clouds in perfect symmetry, echoing the thought in your heart. Later, you overhear a child speaking words that answer a prayer you never shared aloud. Everywhere you turn, reality seems to whisper, you are not alone, you are heard. The church feared such testimony. For signs, once acknowledged, could bypass hierarchy. If the universe itself answered each soul directly, then priests were not gatekeepers but companions. Authority would not command, it would dissolve. And yet, the witnesses persisted. They wrote carefully, trembling, but certain. The signs were real. We were surrounded. The world was alive with voice. You close your eyes. The corridor around you hums faintly, as though arranging itself into rhythm. The lamp flickers once, then steadies. You feel the truth of it. Reality is orchestration. We are surrounded by patterns too subtle for hurried eyes, too woven for careless hearts. Perhaps the visitor did not bring signs. Perhaps it awakened us to see the signs already present. The next folio is darker, its script urgent, its words heavy with finality. It reads like confession or revelation, as though the scribe knew these lines would not be softened, could not be explained away. It begins, there is one key. The text describes the visitor not as ruler, nor messenger, nor judge, but as bearer of a key, a master key. Not a physical object, though it appeared so in the vision. It shimmered like metal, yet pulsed like light. The witnesses swore it was not tool, but principle. Not thing, but truth. The key opens all doors, they write. Not doors of stone, but of mind, of spirit, of time. They describe the visitor lifting the key, turning it in silence, and suddenly their perception shifted. They saw their lives not as chains of events, but as rooms opening endlessly into one another. Each decision was a doorway, each thought a threshold, and the key revealed that all doors were already unlocked. The only barrier was belief in walls. The margin tries, symbol of Christ, but the text resists. Not symbol, not metaphor, reality. The key is presence itself. You imagine standing there, watching as light turns in silence, and suddenly every boundary dissolves. Fear vanishes. Regret loses grip. Even death itself appears as nothing more than another door, waiting quietly for entry. The key does not erase suffering, but it reveals that suffering, too, opens. The church feared this truth. For a master key meant there were no final barriers, no lock controlled by institution, no gate bound by ritual, no door that required human mediation. If the key belonged to all, then no one could monopolize salvation. Every soul carried the potential to walk through every door. The scribe concludes with trembling. The key is not given, it is remembered. You breathe slowly, letting the words settle. The lamp before you glows steady, as though shaped into a key itself, golden against the shadow. Perhaps the visitor never offered object or decree. Perhaps it simply awakened what was already within the master key, waiting quietly in every soul. You realize then, to see the key is to know freedom. To hold the key is to live without fear. To become the key is to dissolve the illusion of locked doors. The corridor sighs, as though exhaling centuries of silence. The page trembles faintly in your hand. And you understand why this was feared, why this was hidden. Freedom too vast can terrify, yet it is also the only truth worth carrying. The final folio in this set feels almost celebratory. Its tone is not heavy, not trembling, not fearful. It is filled with peace, as though written after the storm had passed. The words are steady, the ink calm. It reads like a farewell, or perhaps a beginning. It begins. We became awake. The witness is right that after visions, after silence, after dreams and signs, after fear and gratitude, something changed. Not in the sky, not in the visitor, in themselves. They realized the visitor had not come to rule, nor even to teach. It had come to awaken. And once awake, they no longer needed to cling to presence. The light was within us, they write. The voice was our own. They describe a graduation, not ceremony, not ritual, but shift. The way a child leaves one room to walk into another, not because the old room was wrong, but because growth requires movement. They felt themselves cross a threshold into new awareness. They saw the world differently, not as chain of duties, not as prison of fear, but as living canvas, open and infinite. The margin is almost empty. Only one note remains, too dangerous to spread. You imagine that moment. The witnesses standing together, realizing they no longer needed ladders or gifts, no longer needed redacted pages or guarded vaults. The visitor had planted seed after seed, and now the garden bloomed within. They graduated into their own light. The church feared such testimony most of all. For an awakened soul does not submit blindly. An awakened soul does not depend entirely on authority. An awakened soul carries its own key, its own resonance, its own guidance, and a community of awakened souls cannot be controlled. Yet, the folio survives, and its words speak across centuries. We are not waiting. We are remembering. We are not servants. We are dreamers who dream awake. You rest the page back on the stack. The corridor around you feels lighter now, less shadowed, more alive. The lamp glows steady, no flicker, as if in agreement. You breathe deeply, and for a moment you feel it, the graduation. The shift, the awakening. The visitor is not gone. It was never separate. It was always the hidden part of yourself, waiting for you to open your eyes. Perhaps that is the final truth. Not alien, not angel, not stranger, not even Messiah. Simply presence, planting seeds until the soul blooms into remembrance. The final gift is not dependence, but awakening. The final lesson is not obedience, but freedom. And so the folio closes. The corridor grows quiet. The lamp burns low. You sit in silence, not waiting for another page, but carrying the truth within. The graduation has come. You are already awake. The page you unfold now smells faintly of stone dust, as though it had been kept underground. Its ink is sharp but uneven, as if the hand that wrote it was rushed, glancing constantly over its shoulder. This record does not describe visions or dreams. It describes a place. The words begin. Beneath the basilica, there is a chamber. It is not named, yet it is guarded. The scribe explains how, during renovations, workers stumbled upon a sealed door hidden behind layers of brick. The door bore no inscription, no holy mark, only iron, heavy and cold. When it was opened, a stair spiraled downward, narrow and damp, leading to a room cut into bedrock. Inside, they found not bones, not relics, not treasures, but silence. Yet it was not empty. In the center of the chamber stood a single stone altar, upon which rested a box of unknown craft. Not wood, not bronze, not gold. The scribe calls it a vessel of other light. It shimmered faintly, even in darkness. Those who entered swore they felt watched. Some said their hearts raced. Others claimed their thoughts grew louder, as if the chamber itself was listening. The box was never opened. Instead, it was resealed, buried again, hidden behind new walls. But the memory lingered. The margin notes warn, "Do not speak of this. Dangerous." You imagine standing in that chamber, the air cold, the silence heavy, the vessel before you pulsing faintly, waiting. Would you open it? Would you dare to touch? Or would you, like those before, bury it deeper, fearing what might be revealed? The church understood the danger. A hidden chamber, a vessel of unknown craft, too many questions, too much risk. Better to hide it, seal it, pretend it was never found. Yet the scribe defied silence, leaving this faint account. Perhaps the visitor left something behind. Perhaps the chamber still waits, beneath stone and prayer, holding light that has not yet been seen. The lamp beside you flickers. The corridor feels colder, as though stone walls remember secrets long buried. And you wonder, if you walked downward now, what chamber would wait for you? The next folio is stranger still. Its pages are filled with references to another book, one no longer here. The scribe writes not of visions, not of chambers, but of a text hidden, burned, yet remembered. They call it Codex Obscura. It was not ours, the page begins. It was found. The scribe claims that deep within a monastery library, among scrolls of law and scripture, there was a manuscript of unknown origin. Its script was unlike Latin, unlike Greek, unlike Hebrew. Symbols curved like waves, lines intersected like constellations. No one could read it, yet all felt it meant something. Scholars studied it in secret. Some swore the symbols rearranged themselves when left overnight. Others claimed that staring at them too long induced visions, lights, sounds, whispers not of this world. One monk fell into trance for 3 days, waking only to say, "It spoke. The margin is frantic." Blasphemy. Destroy. The church decided the risk was too great. The codex was declared heretical, gathered, and burned. But the scribe confesses, "I copied fragments. I could not let it die. What fragments remain here are small, fragile, incomplete, symbols drawn shakily, like attempts to capture stars in ink. Yet even faint, they radiate strangeness. Some resemble spirals. Others look like ladders of fire. One mirrors the shape of a wheel within wheel. You trace the shapes with your finger and feel a faint hum, as though the memory of their power has not faded. You imagine those monks huddled in candlelight, turning pages, hearts pounding, eyes wide. They could not read, yet they knew. They sensed presence, a voice beneath the symbols. Perhaps not language, but frequency. Perhaps not writing, but code. The church feared what could not be controlled. Better to burn mystery than to admit it. Better to destroy the codex than to risk it speaking beyond authority. Yet the fragments remain, copied by trembling hand, hidden in margins. You close your eyes. The symbols glow faintly in your mind, rearranging, shifting, alive. Perhaps the codex was not destroyed at all. Perhaps it still speaks, waiting for those who dare to listen without fear. The corridor hums faintly, as though echoing the resonance of lost words. The lamp quivers. You hold the folio closer, and for a moment you feel the forbidden codex alive again, whispering across centuries. The final folio in this set is heavier, darker, its script marked with blotches where ink pooled from trembling hands. It describes no vision, no codex, no chamber. It describes people, leaders of the church, gathered in secret. The account begins. They met at night, with no record, no decree, only silence. The council was not like others. No trumpets, no banners, no proclamations. Only a small room, candles low, men and women in robes speaking quietly. The subject, the visitor. Testimonies too many to ignore, yet too dangerous to accept. The scribe recounts fragments of their debate. One voice says, "If we admit, we lose all." Another replies, "If we deny, we betray truth." Another whispers, "The people cannot carry this." Not yet. Silence falls. Candles flicker. At last, one decision emerges, not to proclaim, not to condemn, but to seal, to lock testimonies in archives, to bury chambers, to burn codices, to call visions metaphor. It was not denial. It was delay. The scribe writes bitterly. They chose silence as shield. They feared more than they trusted. You imagine that council, the weight of centuries on their shoulders, the pressure of empire, the fear of schism. Perhaps they believed they were protecting faith. Perhaps they were protecting power. Perhaps both. Yet their choice shaped history. To keep the visitor hidden. To let silence rule. The The margin notes are faint. We obeyed. We sealed. But the light will return. Have we won? And the member thing of the bellity of present. We could also days. We could all of the bellity. We could also day. We could also day. The margin notes are faint. The margin notes are faint. The margin notes are faint. We could also days. You close your eyes and picture them. Tired faces bent over parchment, sealing decisions they did not fully believe. Perhaps some wept. Perhaps some prayed. Perhaps one or two hoped secretly that the visitor would come again, to end their burden, to reveal what they could not. The church became guardian not only of truth, but of silence. And silence once chosen became tradition. The corridor around you feels heavy, as though the weight of that counsel lingers still. The lamp sputters, then steadies, and you realize the silent counsel did not end the story, it only postponed it. The visitor waits still, beyond counsels, beyond decrees, beyond walls of silence. And perhaps, as you hold this trembling page, you are part of the next counsel, not of silence, but of remembrance. The page you lift now is thinner than the others, nearly translucent, its edges fraying. Yet the story it carries is steady, clear. It speaks of a single traveler, a pilgrim who wandered for years from shrine to shrine, searching not for relics, not for indulgence, but for light. The text begins. He was ordinary. The scribe emphasizes this. He was not a bishop, not a saint, not a scholar. Only a man who walked. He carried little more than bread, water, and a small wooden cross. He slept by roadsides, begged for food, prayed in silence. Yet one night, as he crossed a barren plain under the stars, light found him. The account is simple. A glow descended from the sky, silent, steady, surrounding him. It did not strike him blind. It did not terrify. It enveloped him like a mantle, soft and warm. He fell to his knees, not out of fear, but out of awe. The witness writes, "He carried light afterward, not upon him but within him. Those who met him afterward described something strange. His presence calmed animals. Infants stopped crying in his arms. Quarrels ended when he entered a room. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He did not preach. He did not seek disciples. He simply walked, carrying the light he had received. The church did not canonize him. No feast bears his name. His memory lingers only here, fragile in fading ink. Why? Because his holiness did not pass through ritual, did not kneel before authority. It came directly, freely, undeserved, yet undeniable. You imagine meeting him on a road, dust on his feet, cloak torn, eyes quiet yet bright. You might mistake him for beggar, for wanderer, for nobody. But then he speaks a single word, perhaps your name, and suddenly you feel seen, recognized, embraced by presence larger than both of you. The scribe concludes gently. The light seeks not kings, but pilgrims. You rest the page on your lap. The corridor is silent. The lamp glows warm. And you wonder, how many pilgrims walk even now, carrying light unnoticed, unseen, waiting for eyes ready to recognize it. The next folio feels heavy, though its parchment is no thicker than the others. Its words drip with sorrow, as though the hand that wrote them carried grief too heavy to contain. It begins, "We were told not to speak." The account tells of a group of witnesses, monks and sisters, who had seen the visitor with their own eyes, who had felt its presence, who had carried its imprint in their hearts. Yet when they tried to speak, when they tried to tell others, they were silenced. Some by command, some by exile, some by fear. The scribe describes one brother who stood in the pulpit, ready to tell his vision of the moving light. Before he spoke, the abbot touched his arm and whispered, "Do not, for your sake." Another sister confided to her confessor about the dream she shared with others, only to be told she was deceived by the devil. A young novice wrote his visions in a journal, only to find the pages burned by morning. Silence fell heavier than chains. They were not forbidden from praying, not forbidden from serving, but they were forbidden from naming what they had seen. The margin is faint. They feared confusion. Another hand adds, they feared loss of power. They feared loss of power. You imagine the pain of that silence, carrying truth too large for words, yet forced to lock it away. To pray daily, to kneel faithfully, yet to know that what burned inside you could never be spoken aloud. The witnesses must have felt like exiles in their own sanctuaries. Yet the scribe insists. The silence did not kill the truth. It made it seed. Truth buried in silence does not vanish. It waits. It grows roots. It rises when the season comes. Perhaps the veil of silence was never a grave, but a field. Perhaps the visitor knew this and trusted time to do its work. You close your eyes. The corridor feels heavier now, as though centuries of silence press against its walls. The lamp flickers, its light dim for a moment. You breathe slowly, and you realize silence is not end. Silence is womb. The veil may have hidden the truth, but it could not destroy it. It only made the truth stronger, waiting for the day it would rise again. The final folio in this set is unsettling. Its words are not calm, not reverent, but anxious. The script is hurried, jagged, as if written by someone afraid they were being seen even as they wrote. It begins, "We were not alone in our watching." The scribe explains that those who looked for the visitor, those who waited in prayer, those who watched the heavens, soon realized they themselves were being watched. Not by brothers, not by abbots, not by inquisitors, but by something else. The witnesses describe the sensation of eyes upon them, heavy yet unseen. They felt it during vigils, during silence, even in sleep. Some awoke to find shadows moving where no flame flickered. Others swore they saw figures at the edge of their vision, tall, still, cloaked in darkness. When they turned, the figures were gone. The margin whispers, "Demons." Another hand suggests, "Guardians." But the scribe's tone is more complex. They did not harm. They only observed. You imagine kneeling in a chapel, candle before you, when suddenly you sense it. The feeling of being measured, weighed, studied, not with malice, not with kindness, only with intensity. As if you are specimen, experiment, mystery. As if your prayers themselves are being recorded. The church feared such testimony. To admit watchers was to admit surveillance beyond earth, beyond heaven, beyond hierarchy. Who watches humanity? Why? What do they seek? The questions were too many, too dangerous. So the accounts were buried. The scribe concludes uneasily. Perhaps we are not the only seekers. Perhaps we too are observed. You set the page down, feeling the corridor tighten around you. The lamp's glow trembles as though eyes flicker in the shadows. You breathe, steady, remembering the witness's words. The watchers did not harm. They only observed. Perhaps the visitor was not alone. Perhaps every vision, every dream, every sign has been part of something larger, a study not yet understood. Perhaps we are not only dreamers, but also dreamed. The corridor grows still. The lamp steadies. You hold the folio close, and you whisper silently, "If you are watching, let me see." The folio you hold now feels conflicted, torn not in parchment but in voice. Its words do not flow in one hand, but many. Some lines are smooth, careful, reverent. Others are hurried, sharp, angry. This is not one record, it is many, colliding. The first voice writes, "We saw the light descend. It was holy. It was angel." The next voice, written in darker ink, insists, "It was no angel. It was stranger." Another, shaky, whispers, "It blessed us." Yet beside it, bold strokes cut across. "It deceived us." The page becomes argument. No vision is stable, no memory unbroken. Each witness holds a different truth. Some weep with awe, some shiver with fear, some refuse to speak at all. Their testimonies fracture like glass struck by stone, scattering into shards that cut even as they shine. The margin tries to heal. Perhaps metaphor. But the voices resist. They are raw, insistent, unwilling to fold into one neat story. You imagine the scene. A group of monks seated in a hall, asked to give account. One swears the visitor was clothed in gold. Another insists it wore no form at all. One claims it spoke words he still remembers. Another cries out that it never spoke, only watched. The abbot listens, frowning, knowing the contradictions will tear faith apart. The scribe does not choose. They copy all, leaving the contradictions visible. Perhaps that was the truest testimony, that the visitor could not be captured by one voice. Perhaps it appeared differently to each heart, giving each what they could bear. The church feared such fracture. Faith requires unity, creed, single voice. But here, the truth refused to be singular. It was plural, layered, many-colored. To preserve such testimony would mean embracing contradiction, admitting that one story may hold 1,000 versions. You close your eyes. The corridor seems to ripple, as though multiple truths move at once around you. The lamp flickers into double shadow, then triple. For a moment, you see many forms of yourself reflected in the stone, each holding a different page, each whispering a different memory. Perhaps truth is not singular. Perhaps testimony is always fractured. And perhaps the visitor is not diminished by contradiction, but revealed through it. The next page is smoother, written in careful script, its words steady, deliberate. It speaks of a man who watched not prayers but stars. He was an astronomer, working in secret. For the church allowed charts but feared speculation. Yet his eyes lingered on the heavens long into the night, and what he saw unsettled him. The scribe recounts his claim. The stars moved, not in the way of seasons, not in the slow drift of constellations, but sharply, suddenly, as if guided by hand. He recorded lights that appeared where no stars belonged, hovered, then vanished. He drew maps of their paths, straight lines, sudden turns, even pauses. His notes described lights that pulsed, brighter than any planet, then dimmed into silence. He presented his findings to a bishop, trembling. The bishop frowned, whispering only, "These are no stars." The charts were hidden, locked in chest. But the astronomer continued. Night after night, he climbed to his tower, quill in hand, heart racing. One night, the light came closer. It hovered above his tower, bathing him in silver glow. He fell to his knees, not from fear but from recognition. He swore the light was not distant fire, but presence alive, deliberate. He wrote, "It watched me as I watched it." The margin tries to dismiss, perhaps comet, perhaps trick of sight. But the astronomer's notes are precise, distances measured, angles calculated, too exact for fancy. You imagine him standing at the tower's edge, ink staining his hands, eyes wide. For years he watched from afar. Then, suddenly, the stars themselves turned to watch him. The hunter became the hunted, the seeker became the sought. The church could not permit his notes to spread. Astronomy was already dangerous, already too close to questioning geocentric truth. To add living lights, watchers in the sky, would unseat not only doctrine but cosmos itself. The scribe concludes quietly. He died unknown, but his charts remain. They wait. You close your eyes. The corridor hums faintly, as though distant stars pulse overhead. The lamp flickers, steady, then brightens suddenly, casting longer shadows. You breathe slowly, and you realize, perhaps the astronomer was not studying stars at all. Perhaps he was studying visitors who had always studied us. The final folio in this set feels different. Its ink flows like music, lines curved, letters almost dancing. It does not describe vision, nor chamber, nor watcher. It describes sound, though the witnesses insist no sound was heard. The page begins. We felt a song. The witnesses describe being gathered in prayer when suddenly an overwhelming sensation filled the air. Not vibration, not melody, but resonance. Their bodies trembled as though strings had been plucked within them. Their hearts beat in rhythm not their own. Their breath slowed, aligned. It was music without sound, song without voice. Some wept, some laughed, some fell silent, eyes wide. One wrote, "It was harmony too vast to be heard." The margin hesitates. Perhaps rapture. Another hand. Perhaps mass hysteria. Yet the scribe insists. No. It remained after. We woke to silence, but harmony lingered. You imagine sitting in chapel, chanting psalms, when suddenly all sound fades. Yet within, you feel it, the hum of existence itself, woven through your bones. You are no longer separate. You are part of a greater music, vast and eternal, singing through all things. The witnesses swore that after the song, their lives changed. Quarrels ended. Fears softened. They spoke less, listened more. They felt guided not by command but by rhythm, as though the song continued silently, leading them step by step. The church could not easily contain such accounts. For a song without sound, a harmony beyond words, cannot be owned, cannot be decreed. It makes every soul an instrument. It gives authority not to hierarchy, but to resonance. The scribe concludes, "Perhaps the visitor was music itself. Perhaps presence is not seen but sung." You rest the page against your chest. The corridor hums faintly, vibrating. The lamp flickers in rhythm, as though echoing unheard melody. For a moment, you feel it, the song without sound, moving through your breath, your blood, your being. Perhaps the greatest truth is not light, nor vision, nor doctrine. Perhaps it is harmony, and perhaps the visitor did not speak because words were too small. Instead, it sang through silence, reminding us that we are already part of the eternal music. The folio you hold now is stained, the ink blotched with marks that look like water but may have been tears. Its story is one of beauty and breaking. It begins. There was an icon. The witnesses describe a painting that hung in a small chapel near the cloister. It was old, dark with candle soot, but beloved. It showed Christ enthroned, eyes steady, hand raised in blessing. The faithful prayed before it daily, whispering petitions into its silence. Yet one night, during vigils, the icon changed. They swear the paint shimmered, as though lit from within. The eyes glowed, no longer still pigment but presence alive. For a breathless moment, they felt the image itself lean forward, watching them, aware of them. Then came the sound, a cracking, low and sharp. The wooden panel split, the image fractured. Christ's face shattered into lines, falling into splinters on the floor. Panic spread. Some wept in despair, believing it was omen of judgment. Others fell silent, trembling, certain it was revelation. The scribe records the words of one monk. It was no ruin, it was unveiling. They gathered the pieces carefully, yet something strange remained. Each fragment, though broken, seemed alive. Small splinters of paint still glowed faintly in the dark. Some claimed to see faces within them, stranger faces, radiant and unearthly, not the Christ they knew. The margin tries to steady. Wood decays, paint weakens. Do not read beyond. But the witnesses refused dismissal. They swore the icon had not broken by accident. It had opened. You imagine kneeling in that chapel, the smell of incense still in the air, watching the only holy image you knew splinter before your eyes. Would you feel despair? Or would you dare to see it as gift? That perhaps the face you always prayed to was only one mask among many, and that the true presence cannot be painted, cannot be contained. The church, faced with fragments, chose silence. The broken icon was buried, replaced by new wood, brighter paint, safer image. But the witnesses remembered. They whispered, "Perhaps the face we know was never the only face. This is the redder was of Lage of P. Towns with an aver." You set the folio down, heart trembling. The corridor feels fragile, the lamp casting fractured shadows. Perhaps every icon will one day crack, not to destroy faith, but to expand it. Perhaps shattering is not loss, but unveiling. The next folio carries dust thicker than the rest, as if it had been hidden longer, buried deeper. Its story is not of visions, not of chambers, but of a journey that few remember. It begins, "They were sent." The record tells of a small group of monks chosen by their abbot to travel far, beyond mountains, beyond seas. Their task was never proclaimed. They were told only, "You will find what others fear to see." They carried no banners, no relics, no books, only simple robes and prayers. Their journey lasted months, perhaps years. They walked through villages where no Latin was spoken, across deserts where no cross stood, and then, one night, under unfamiliar stars, they encountered presence, The scribe does not describe lights, nor ladders, nor voices, only stillness. It waited, the record says. It did not move, yet it was there. The monks fell to their knees. They did not ask questions. They did not demand miracles. They simply listened. When they returned, their faces were different. They spoke little of what they had seen. Only this: the Savior is larger than Rome. The abbot trembled. He silenced them. Their pilgrimage was forgotten, their names erased. Yet the folio preserves one sentence, written with careful hand. They carried back not proof, but peace. You imagine walking so far, leaving all behind, only to stand in silence under alien stars and feel presence waiting for you. No words, no visions, only certainty that the holy is vast, unconfined, beyond any one faith, any one city, any one creed. The church buried the pilgrimage, for it threatened boundaries. If salvation stretched beyond empire, beyond doctrine, then control dissolved. But still, dust cannot erase memory. The story lingers, fragile yet alive. The corridor hums softly as you close the page. The lamp flickers, its glow stretching wider, as though remembering those forgotten steps. You wonder, how many pilgrimages have been erased? How many journeys silenced? Because their truth was too vast to fit. The final folio in this set is darker, heavier, its script uneven. It speaks of destruction, yet also of remembrance. It begins. They burned. The account tells of a night when forbidden testimonies, codices, and fragments were gathered in a courtyard. Flames rose high, consuming ink, parchment, voices. The witnesses watched as centuries of vision turned to smoke. The church decreed it cleansing. The people whispered it was loss. But among them stood one man, silent, unnoticed. He did not speak. He did not argue. He only bent to gather handfuls of ashes when the fire dimmed. He carried them in cloth, hid them in jars, buried them in earth. He became the keeper of ashes. The scribe writes, he believed the fire did not end the words. He believed the ashes still held memory, and so he kept them, hidden in caves, sealed in clay. Not to rebuild the texts, not to rewrite, but simply to remember. He swore that one day, when presence returned, the ashes would stir. The words would live again. The margin is faint, superstition. Yet the story endures. The ashes became relics, silent yet potent, waiting in earth like seeds in winter. You imagine standing by the fire, watching words you love turn to smoke. Would you despair? Or would you gather what remained, trusting that nothing sacred ever truly dies? The church may have burned testimonies, but the keeper of ashes knew. Fire cannot destroy truth. It can only change its form. Words become smoke. Smoke becomes memory. Memory becomes seed. The corridor feels heavy as you close the page. The lamp trembles, its glow dimming as though covered in soot. Yet in the darkness, you sense it. Ashes still warm, still whispering. Perhaps even now, they wait beneath stone and soil, ready to rise again when the time is right. And you realize, every silence, every destruction, every burning is not the end. It is only transformation. Ashes are not loss. Ashes are beginning. The folio you open now feels dense, as though the parchment itself remembers weight. Its words do not describe visions in sky or dreams in night, but something buried deeper in the earth itself, within the walls of faith. It begins. The stones moved. The witnesses describe a strange night when tremors shook the basilica. Not violent, not destructive, but rhythmic, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the floor. Candles quivered, walls groaned, yet nothing collapsed. Instead, cracks spread across pillars, revealing veins of light hidden within the stone. The scribe writes, it was as if the walls themselves carried blood. The veins glowed faintly, golden threads running through gray stone, weaving patterns like constellations across the sanctuary. The monks trembled, unsure whether to flee or kneel. Some reached out, touching the cracks, and felt warmth, not heat of fire, but pulse of life. The margin tries to steady, perhaps reflection of flame, illusion. Yet the scribe insists. The light remained after the candles died. You imagine kneeling there, hearing stone breathe, seeing light stream from walls that had always seemed silent. What is temple, if its stones themselves are alive? What is faith, if it is built not only by human hands, but by presence that hides within structure itself? The witnesses swore the veins shifted, forming shapes, spirals, crosses, circles. One claimed he saw a ladder etched in glow. Another swore he saw a face, vast and unearthly, gazing out from stone. The light pulsed for hours, then slowly faded, leaving cracks sealed as though nothing had happened. The church buried the record. To admit living stone was to admit sanctuaries are more than architecture, they are vessels. To admit veins of light was to admit presence dwells not only in heaven but beneath our feet, within walls, within matter itself. The folio concludes with trembling reverence. Perhaps temples are not built for God, but by God. Perhaps the stone remembers. You close the page, the corridor around you trembling faintly. The lamp flickers, casting shadows that crawl across the walls like veins of their own. For a moment, you swear the stone hums beneath your touch. Perhaps the visitor is not only above us. Perhaps it waits beneath, within the bones of earth, within the veins of stone that pulse unseen until time calls them to glow. The next folio carries stains of dampness, as though once soaked. Its words are shaky, smudged, but readable. It tells of water not ordinary, not sacred font, but voice hidden beneath its surface. It begins, "We listened, and the water spoke." The account describes a monastery spring, long considered holy. Pilgrims bathed wounds there, believing it healed. One night, as brothers prayed by its edge, they heard sound not splash, not trickle, but words carried through the water. At first, murmurs, then sentences, not in Latin, not in Greek, but in tones that felt older than language. The scribe writes, "We did not hear with ears, but with marrow." The words vibrated through their bones, filling them with meaning, though no tongue could translate. Some wept, others fell silent. One fainted, whispering, "It told me who I am." The margin hesitates. Perhaps madness, perhaps wind. Yet the witnesses insist the water carried presence. They swore the surface shimmered, forming patterns, circles expanding endlessly, spirals turning inward, faces rising and fading. You imagine leaning over dark spring, expecting silence, only to feel vibration surge through you, telling you truths you never dared ask. You see your reflection ripple, not alone but joined by eyes not your own. The church feared such testimony, for a spring that speaks makes every pilgrim a prophet. It places revelation in hands of earth, beyond altars, beyond books. It makes water scripture, the scribe concludes. We drank, and the voice entered us. It did not leave. You rest the page, feeling the corridor damp, as though underground springs whisper unseen. The lamp trembles, glow wavering like water's surface. For a moment, you hear it too, not with ears, but with marrow. A hum rising beneath silence, telling you what words cannot. Perhaps the visitor hides not only in sky but in water. Perhaps every spring, every ocean, hums with presence, waiting for those who dare to listen. The final folio in this set is darker, its script jagged, its words uneasy. It speaks of gathering, not of light, not of harmony, but of figures unknown. It begins, "We saw them encircle." 2. The witnesses describe a night when during prayer, shadows moved differently. Candlelight flickered, yet the shadows it cast no longer matched their bodies. Figures appeared where no monks knelt, tall and thin, forming a circle around the chapel. At first they seemed absence, void, but then, faint glow lined their shapes, outlining beings unlike any human form. They did not speak. They did not move closer. They only circled, swaying faintly, as though in rhythm to sound no one heard. The witnesses trembled, uncertain whether to continue praying or flee. One monk whispered, "They are watching." Another replied, "They are waiting." The margin shivers. Demons? Angels? Unknown. The scribe himself admits fear. "I could not raise my eyes. Yet I knew they were not ours." You imagine sitting in chapel, head bowed, when suddenly you sense movement shadows stretching into forms that surround you, silent, patient. Would you kneel deeper, trusting presence? Or would you run, heart racing, desperate to escape unseen gaze? The witnesses did neither. They stayed, trembling, until dawn broke. And when sunlight entered, the circle dissolved, shadows returning to walls, no trace of beings left, yet none forgot. The scribe ends with unease. If they wait, what do they wait for? You close the page, pulse quick. The corridor around you feels crowded, though you see no one. The lamp's glow flickers, casting circles of shadow that stretch too far, too tall. For a moment, you feel surrounded by watchers unseen, patient, waiting. Perhaps the visitor does not come alone. Perhaps it travels with circle of others, witnesses to our prayers, guardians of thresholds, keepers of mysteries. Perhaps they wait still, silent in shadow, until time comes for them to step into light.